If you think talking about mental illness is scary, imagine what happens when we don't talk about it. Join the conversation. Visit letstalkstigma.org.
I am an orientation and mobility specialist.
I'm a lawyer.
I'm a firefighter.
I'm an advocate.
I'm a sister.
I am a mother.
I'm a friend.
I am me.
I have bipolar disorder.
Depression.
On borderline personality.
I'm not embarrassed.
1 out of 5 people lives with a mental health condition.
We're all people, and if we talk about it, there's hope.
Hello, everybody. I'm Matt Smith, Executive Director of Prevention Focus and board member of the Anti-Stigma Coalition. On behalf of all of us with that organization, I'd like to welcome all of you to the latest in our series of Facebook Live events. This time our program is called Back to Basics, sharing stories of stigma and hope. With the new year, we thought it would be a good idea to revisit the stigma around mental illness at a very basic and straightforward level. Remind ourselves of the importance of this issue and not only the need to overcome it, but also that it can be overcome. I'm excited to be joined today by 2 local men who have experienced the stigma of mental illness firsthand, and they've devoted a lot of time and energy speaking out and educating others on this issue. Before I introduce them, a couple of quick things. Our program is for up to 1 hour. During this time, if you have a question or comment, please do type it into the chat box and we'll respond accordingly. Your questions often lead to some great dialogue, so please don't be shy. First up, we have Dan Lukasik. Dan is a lawyer and judicial wellness coordinator for the New York State Office on Court Administration. He is the director of the recent documentary, My Brother Lost in Time, A Bipolar Life, and recently launched the Buffalo Depression Project website. Thanks for joining us, Dan.
Thanks very much, Matt. Happy to be here.
Wonderful. And we are also joined by Karl Shallowhorn. Karl is the chair of the board for the Mental Health Association of New York State and is a former chair of our Anti-Stigma Coalition. He's authored 2 books, Working on Wellness, A Practical Guide to Mental Health, and Leadership Through the Lens of the 12 Steps. Great to see you as always, Karl.
Thanks, Matt.
So we've got 2 great guests today trying to talk about this very, very important issue. And I'd like to start off by both hearing about some of these exciting projects you've been working on. Dan, could you just tell us a little bit about the documentary?
Yeah, the film about a year ago, or a little bit more than a year ago, it was the 1-year anniversary of my younger brother's passing. He suffered from bipolar all of his life and lost his life to a fentanyl overdose almost 2 years ago. So last year on the 1-year anniversary, I was trying to think of an article to write for the Buffalo News, and I couldn't seem to get it done. And a friend introduced me to a filmmaker who'd done films for PBS and film festivals, and we met. He agreed to do, amazingly, he agreed to do the project, and it's 17 minutes long, and it's really a love story between my brother and I. And in addition to that love, we shared mental illness, my brother with bipolar disorder and myself with major depression. So the film premiered at the UB Center for the Arts. At UB, we had about 200 people, and then at the North Park Theater. And then in October, it made its TV premiere on PBS television.
Wonderful, and I imagine it's led to quite a bit of conversation. I've seen it. It's a wonderful piece of work, Dan. You should be very proud of it, and it's great in its portrayal and its opening of doors for people to talk more about the issue. I imagine that happened pretty easily at some of the events you've already thrown.
Yeah, well, the idea behind it as it developed was that, we had, in addition to showing of the film, the screening of the film, after that short documentary, we had a panel discussion with local psychiatrists, psychologists, mental health advocates. So the idea is to show it around the country, wherever anybody wants to show it, and communities can have their own panel discussions and begin these conversations and fight stigma. So I think it's important. And the other important develop was I launched the Buffalo Depression Project website at the same time. Both the film and the the website, the new website, in honor of my brother. And I've done a lot of work around the country and statewide, but I wanted to focus now more in my community. And one of the things that I thought may be helpful was we have so many fantastic mental health organizations, resources, and help, but a lot of people don't know where to find them or what they do. Or so I kind of built a website and called it the Buffalo Depression Project, so people could quickly look up Depression Buffalo and find the help and resources they need, and I hope encouragement.
Wonderful work. Hearing about that very much. Karl, you're a man of many diverse interests, and I've known you for years. And well, we haven't talked really about the books. I'd love to hear about the books. What got you excited about the books, and what could we expect if we pick up these books and read them?
Yeah, so I've written a couple of books, and that came out of my love of writing. I've been a blogger in the past. I started blogging for a website called healthyplace.com, and then I evolved into writing for BP Hope, which is another website, and BP Magazine. So it kind of started with blogging. And right around 2009, 2010, I really wanted to write a book that was more of a self-help guide, if you want to call it that, for people living with mental health challenges. And so I wrote something, Work on Wellness, a practical guide to mental illness, and a practical guide to mental health, rather. And it's sort of like part self-care, part memoir. So I kind of took each chapter and talked about a different part of my life, and then followed up with questions that a person can ask and themselves, and do some exploratory work and uncover maybe a little bit more about themselves. The second book is Leadership Through the Lens of the 12 Steps. And that book was released about 4 years ago. And that was released actually right in the height of the pandemic, just coming out of the pandemic. And I was in business for myself. I had my own consulting company, and I was doing work in the area of training and development and education. And I had a thought based on my own lived experience in 12-step programs to write a guide. And so in one of the 12-step programs, it's called a step working guide. And so I patterned this book, Leadership Through the Lens of the 12 Steps, along the lines of the guide, where each chapter correlated to a different step. The difference is that with each step in the guide, I made it relevant to more formal business or work-related goals. And so in each chapter, there's, like I said, a correlating step. And then there's scenarios, and then also questions that a person can answer either by themselves or with the assistance of someone, or even in a group setting. I did group work with Horizon Health Services and Buffalo Federation Neighborhood Centers with the book. And I also did some one-on-one work with some individuals. So it's a pretty multifaceted kind of approach to looking at guidance and exploration through more of a business lens. And they're both still available on Amazon. You can still find them on there, on that platform.
I was going to ask you that. How do people get a hold of the book? So you took that in.
Yeah, they're still on Amazon. So you would if you just use my name on Amazon, that's where you'll find. That's probably the easiest way to find it. The book. So yeah.
Oh, great! I'm sure that we're helping a lot of people. You've both been involved with this cause for quite some time, and you do have different roles right now that focus on mental health. Dan, what exactly do you do with the New York State Office on Court Administration?
Yeah, well, I've been a lawyer for over 30 years. Much of my career was spent as a trial lawyer here in Buffalo. About 5 years ago, I was appointed by the Chief Judge of New York State to be the new Judicial Wellness Coordinator, which is a full-time job. I create and implement and deliver mental health programming throughout the state for our 1,600 state Supreme Court justices. And then since the pandemic happened, really half the time the judges want me to give talks and support to people they work with, court clerks, court deputies, secretarial people. So I do that in addition to working just with the judges.
Great. Thank you. And Karl, you've been with now the Mahaney's now for a bit, and I please take this opportunity to explain to people what Mahaney's actually is and what your role is with them.
Sure. So Mahaney's is the Mental Health Association in New York State. It is the statewide affiliate of Mental Health America, which is, United States, one of the premier advocacy education programs and organizations. And so Mahaney's is the lead affiliate for a network in New York State of 26 nonprofits all through the state of New York. And Mahaney's is involved with a lot of work, everything from policy to education and training. There's a school mental health education and training center. There's another program called Care Path, which is for family members to learn how to help their loved one living with mental health challenges. They do mental health first aid training and are a leader in that program. They've teamed up with American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. And also coming up in March 12th, in a couple of months, there's going to be Mental Health Matters Day, which is our legislative day in Albany, where we go and we have a program in the morning. But more importantly, as importantly, I should say, we speak to legislators about our legislative agenda and what we are trying to move in terms of the legislation in the state government. One thing that came out recently that Mahaney's put out was their 10-point plan to address a lot of things in New York State related to mental health. Most importantly, workforce. As those of us who are in the mental health arena know, we're dealing with a lack of people in the workforce for mental health and substance use. And so we're advocating for instance, a 7.8% increase in cost of living adjustment for workers in the non-profit sector in mental health and addiction work and behavioral health. There's also work we're trying to do to work with recent legislation that's being proposed by the governor revolving involuntary commitment of individuals. So there's a lot of items and things that Mahaney's does that really advances the cause of mental health for all New Yorkers. And it's a great organization. I feel very privileged to be the chair of the board. And it's something that has really made my career, it's really enriched my career greatly, knowing the people who are involved. Glenn Lieben is the CEO, and he is just one of the best leaders I've ever had to work with.
It's really great. So both of you are uniquely qualified to be lending your expertise to the roles that you currently sit in and the roles you've sat in prior to this. All of it is a story. All of it is a life experience as it's unfolded to get you to this place. I'd like to revisit those stories. And Dan, if you're willing, I'd like to go back to the beginning of when you first started to realize that mental illness was an issue in your life and your family, and tell us how that all came about, please.
Well, at the time, I'm almost 65 now. About 25 years ago, I was the managing partner at my law firm, and I'd always had periods before that dealing with too much stress or anxiety, but I always bounced back. It was about 40, I really didn't bounce back, and it tipped over into depression, and then I really fell into the basement with depression. And I studied psychology in undergrad at Buffalo State College, and I thought I knew what depression was, but I really didn't until I went through it. And it feels funny. I'm humbled that you called me an expert. I don't feel like an expert so much, but I think I've learned a few things over the years. One of the things that really defined my experience with depression is I was sad all the time. I think as men in this culture, we're not, encouraged to show those kind of feelings, and I certainly did not. And privately, I would cry and sob and be very, very sad. they'll try to put up a good front. I started having terrible problems sleeping, even though I was tired all the time. And where the rubber met the road for me and my job as a lawyer was I started having problems concentrating, getting things done, writing, reading, appearing in a courtroom. So at some point, the wheel fell off and I couldn't do that anymore. And I went to see a psychiatrist for the first time, and he put me on medication. And I took 3 months off of work. I came back and, something had been changed in me, and I think that it was difficult for people around me. At the time, the firm employed about 50 people, and I was responsible for those people, my family. So it was a very painful time and a scary time, I think it's fair to say. And so that began my 25-year journey of, I think you could say recovery, but for a lot of folks with mental illness, it's a chronic process where you kind of get better and then you fall, and then you get better and then you fall. So I think that's why it's important having events like this to hear from other people with these experiences, these lived experiences, that, you can get back up. And sometimes you need other people, sometimes a lot of other people to help you get back up.
Well, you mentioned other people. We talked a little bit about work, and work was sometimes the first context that we kind of go to, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think generally speaking, it was a difficult thing for my 3 partners, but also the support staff. I think we're at a different point in our culture 25 years ago with stigma and understanding mental health problems. I felt pretty lonely. I think that's can be one of the worst aspects of it. And I didn't know anybody else with depression. I really didn't, and certainly not any lawyers with depression. I felt to blame for what was happening to me, that it was my fault. And I thought, why can't I get out of this? And but I couldn't. And I think other people around me that didn't have any frame of reference for what that was, right? What depression is. So I think they either chose to be someone angry at me because I think it frightened them, or I noticed that people stopped including me in things like at work, where people would normally invite me to lunch. Those things really went down. Or people would walk by my office without stopping in and saying hello, where they had a lot in the past. So, those things hurt. Stigma hurts. And but we've come a long way, I'm happy to say, from 25 years ago, but we still have a long way to go. But I think it took a lot of time for my partners, and some understood better than others. And it was a big surprise and difficult for my marriage in the sense that my wife didn't have any frame of reference for it either. And it can be very frightening for a spouse or loved one or one's children, if they're old enough, to try to get a grip on what's going on, to try to understand what mental illness is. And really, I think especially when you just don't know when it's going to end. When are things going to get better? When are you going to be able to work again? Those kind of issues.
Yeah, I wonder a bit. You mentioned kind of like a shunning that kind of happened, in your work environment, and I just wonder what some of the feelings might have been that your coworkers were having to cause them to behave in that way. I wonder about, resentment because of work issues or fear. Or is it, what do you think really it was that kept them from inviting you to lunch?
I think that one is certainly fear. I think one of them was anger at me. One partner said, what the hell's wrong with you? Snap out of it. You got a lot of people depending on you. You got a great life. You have a wonderful family. Go on a vacation, but he didn't understand that I'd go on vacation and I would be profoundly depressed. So that added to his confusion and my confusion. And the thing I didn't appreciate at the time really was you know, I was the leader of the firm at the time, and I think financially and the viability of the company, they were afraid what would happen to them if I didn't work anymore, or if I worked, I wasn't good as I used to be, and those are unspoken fears. And I think they get projected out sometimes as anger or avoidance or shaming sometimes. And I think that's what stigma, when we stigmatize others, we shame them. And that can be done verbally or in silence, walking by my door, not even, that was shaming. I felt terrible,
Right. I bet. And for all of you watching right now, we encourage everybody, if you have any questions along the way, please do use the chat feature. And we do try to get to all the questions that do come in from our audience. We have our first one right now. And I think that, Dan, since we're talking to you, we can continue. You took steps. What were those steps to choosing a mental health professional to get started? How did that go with you?
For me, Matt?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, I think that it was a process of, for me, a switch in identity from thinking of it as, okay, this is just a psychological problem like in the past. I pop into therapy, I pop out, stress, anxiety, maybe a little burnout sprinkled in. I came to have a change of identity in a way and saw it not so much as a psychological issue for me, but as mental illness. And in some regards, that was helpful in a way, because I recognized I had an illness. I wasn't somehow defective or to blame for what was happening with me. And then I began to treat it as such, as an illness, and began to really concentrate on regularly going to psychotherapy with a psychologist, taking medication, but also other things. A big thing that has been critical for me is about 20 years ago, I started a depression support group for lawyers in my community. So we still have that group, and it started out as 20 years ago as once a month and once a week, and now it's twice a week. And I think the fellowship is really important because, like I said earlier, mental illness can be a really, really lonely place to be, even when you're surrounded by people who care and love you, right? Because they might not understand, that's not their fault. But in a support group, other people get it. You don't have to explain it to them. They understand what it's like to have mental illness. They understand what it's like to support a family, get up every day and work with those conditions. And the vast majority of people with mental illness, especially, I'll speak for myself, with depression, are working people. They live with these conditions. They do their best to manage them. So we all need support, and I think a support group is very critical.
Did you go to your primary care physician at first? How did you settle on first getting help from a professional?
Well, I think over the years, I said I used to go to a psychologist, and what happened when the bottom fell out, my psychologist said, listen, Dan, whatever I'm telling you and suggestions I'm making is just not penetrating your brain. It's not penetrating the depression. This is now a medical issue, and you need the intervention of a psychiatrist. So I think that was also a turning point in recognizing that I needed to tamp down or lessen my symptoms of depression to be able to benefit from psychotherapy and then implement some of those things. Because, we can go to therapy for 50 years, but if we don't implement and if it doesn't change us in some fundamental way, not much happens, right? We continue to be sick, and we don't get the intervention and support we need. And certainly that's happened with my brother who died. He didn't think he had mental illness, and he didn't get the treatment he needed, even though he's a brilliant person and a very successful businessman. He just did not get the treatment and support he needed.
That's so crucial. Karl, I want to shift over to you and talk about your story. And how did illness enter your life? When did you know there was an issue? What was happening?
Well, for me, it was a pretty cataclysmic event. I was a freshman in college in 1981. I was going to General Motors Institute in Flint, Michigan, and I had begun to experience symptoms of psychosis, which is basically impingement with reality. Basically, so things that interfere with reality. I was getting paranoid, and I was also using substances. I was using, cannabis, marijuana, which wasn't helping any. And so as a result of that, I was losing sleep. I wasn't sleeping well. And it all came to a head. It was actually Friday the 13th. I'll never forget this, in February, Friday the 13th. And I was in my dormitory room, and I began to be delusional, really, which means I was believing I was something or someone that I wasn't. I believed I was the devil. And I made an attempt on my life, and the residence hall director came to the room with a security guard. They came into the room, they saw me, and her words were, "We better get him to the hospital." So they took me to the Flint Hurley Hospital, Hurley Medical Center. And when I got there, the nurse, triage nurse, actually helped me to sign my name. So it was a voluntary admission. If it had been involuntary, it would be hard to get out. So it was voluntary admission, technically. So my parents came from Buffalo, immediately, and brought me home. I was admitted to the Buffalo General Hospital Community Mental Health Center, aka 80 Goodrich, which is long gone. But that really was where my journey started. I was 18 years old. I'm 62 now. So I've been living with this pretty much for almost 44 years. And over those years, early on, I would go back to using substances. I would, go through the hospital system time and time again. So I ended up not only at 80 Goodrich, I was at the Buffalo Psychiatric Center a couple of times, and then also at ECMC, all of this while going to school. So I went to, UB for 3 semesters as a non-matriculated student. Then I ended up graduating from Buffalo State, despite all this. It took me 7 years. When I got clean in 1988 from using substances. I went to a 12-step program, 12-step meeting. And that's where things really changed for me. I had another hospitalization when I had about a year clean. But that was a result of, just kind of getting used to, I think, the adjustment to this new lifestyle and, with medication and everything. But it was really rough for a while, like during those early years. I didn't have a lot of guidance back then. There weren't peers. Like we have peers now, people with lived experience who will share their experience with you and kind of help guide you and walk with you and work with you. And we didn't have that back then. I had a counselor. I had counselors those days, but I was not a very good patient. I was not compliant. I was not following the treatment plan until I had the counselor who guided me towards the 12-step program. So all that is to say is that it was really hard early on. And my route to getting help was really, I went where they sent me. I had private psychiatrists at first. Eventually, I got linked with Horizon Health Services, where I was a patient for many years. Of course, this is before the dawn of Medicaid managed care and everything else. So I could go there with virtually unlimited visits and without being scrutinized by insurance companies. So I was very fortunate in that respect. And then eventually, I transitioned out of Horizon and I worked with a private therapist, and I still have a private therapist now and psychiatrist.
Mm-hmm. For any of you just joining us, I'm Matt Smith from the Anti-Stigma Coalition, and I'm joined by Dan Lukasik and Karl Shallowhorn. Please, everyone joining us, please do take a minute and check out our website, letstalkstigma.org, and maybe join the over 4,000 others in taking the pledge to end stigma. Also, if you are connected with a business organization or the faith community, you can become an organizational member of the Anti-Stigma Coalition. You can find information for this on the website under the members tab. Now back to this really compelling conversation. I know that Karl, how was your family when this was all going on? So you mentioned all these different things that were happening. How are things with your family at home?
You know, that's a really good question, because that's something that I've had thought about a lot over the years. So my mother was a trained rehabilitation counselor. She got her master's in rehabilitation counseling, I think, in like 1976. And of course, my episode was in 1981. She was working at the time at the University of Buffalo Educational Opportunity Center, as I think she was like the counseling supervisor. Despite all her knowledge, all her education about counseling and therapy, none of that played a part in how she viewed my illness. There was a lot of stigma in the family. She didn't talk about it to anybody else, or didn't want to talk about it to anybody else, which is a really, very prominent, and it still is in the Black community. I had support. I mean, mind you, I would get to appointments. They would take me to appointments, but it was like the biggest elephant in the room you can imagine. We never talked about it at home, despite all the things I went through. And it was kind of weird looking back on it. My mom died in 1996. I never got a chance to explore with her really what was going on at the time, which, that's maybe one of my regrets, is I never got a chance to talk to her about, what was going on in your head at that time, what was happening. My dad, even my dad, we never really talked about it later in life, about, what happened back in those days. It was just kind of assumed that I would just kind of go along with the plan and do things as they needed to be. Unfortunately, I got better. I feel very privileged that I got better. I had a lot of help in terms of just professional help. But I count myself very fortunate.
Well, family's such a key thing. Looking now at our chat again, as far as people asking questions. One question that has come in: how can family members be helpful? I'd like you to both think about that for a second. And one is specifically here for Dan: does mental illness, addiction run in your family? I know we've talked a bit about your brother, but is there any other of that going on in your family, Dan?
Yes, I talked about it in the documentary. My dad was a World War II vet, and became an alcoholic. There were 5 kids, and he had all the classic symptoms of bipolar disorder, undiagnosed. He died in 1981, actually, when I was 19, of alcoholism. And my siblings have had bouts with depression. I have nieces, nephews, aunts, uncles with various substance abuse or mental health issues. I think that I have no doubt there's a genetic component to all this, but I think that I'm not an expert on this, but I think that it's pretty well known that when you have something like depression running in a family, plus a traumatic childhood, which I clearly did. And then for me, I don't think I fully understood why I went into law, but I went into one of the most stressful professions that I could. And, those 3 things were like the perfect storm for my depression to drop on me like a bomb when I was 40. So the answer is yes, it runs through my family. I have several members of my family who struggle with various aspects of it.
If I can just jump in real quick, I want to add talk about my experience, which is kind of interesting. I'm adopted, and I discovered my birth family in 2017. And I'll keep this brief, but as it turns out, my birth mother lived with a serious mental illness.
Oh, wow.
And had abandoned. I met my siblings, many of them, and I have a whole bunch, as it turns out. But the story is, she lived with a serious mental illness, abandoned the 3 siblings that she was raising at the time, my brother, my 2 sisters, and then fled to Seattle, or Washington State, I should say, then lived in Alaska for the last 25 years of her life. She died several years ago. I never got a chance to meet her, but talk about that genetic component, right? I mean, I'm adopted. My dad didn't have any mental health problems. My mother certainly didn't, but she did. But then you talk about stress, you talk about other factors like, cannabis use and things like that. So that was my perfect storm.
Interesting. Obviously, our families are key in the shaping of who we are. That those relationships from very early on make a big difference, and whatever that home environment is integral to how things go. Knowing all that, what advice would we have for family members? How do we get family members to be most helpful to use their unique power in the situation? What do you think?
For me, what I do, like, I've met so many people over the years, women, men who are struggling with depression. And one of the things I tell them that I didn't do was to help educate their spouse, or if they're children or adults or even their friends, through such things as educating them with a great book, how to help somebody when they're depressed. And someone might say to me, "Oh, I'll tell my wife to buy that." I go, "No, you buy that. You buy it and you give it to your spouse." And it's a way of letting them know that you understand that it's difficult for them too. You're in it together. So I think that is important. I recently had coffee with another lawyer who's going through a major depression. He had to go through electroshock treatments a couple months ago. He's having a lot of difficulty. His wife's a wonderful person. They have 3 small children, but it's stressful. So I said, "Has she been to any of your appointments with your psychiatrist?" And he said, "No." I said, "Invite her to the next appointment. Let her be part of your recovery process." So I think, I didn't do that, or I didn't understand that might even be helpful. But I think families can do a lot. The other thing is there's a fantastic website called Families for Depressive Awareness, or Depression Awareness, that I think is a great thing. And our local NAMI, National Alliance for Mental Illness, is a great resource.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. I was going to echo exactly what you're saying there, Dan, about education. I think education is so important in understanding what these illnesses are like and how they affect people. And it also addresses the stigma, right? Because if you're more educated, then you're less likely to understand, you're more likely to understand what's going on and maybe feel that it's less of a moral problem as opposed to a medical problem. And I too was going to mention NAMI. NAMI is a wonderful organization locally and nationally, for that matter, that does great work with families and education. They have support groups here locally that people can reach out to. It's NAMIBuffaloWestNewYork.com or NAMIBuffalo.org, I think it is. If you just Google NAMI Buffalo, there you'll find it. But all that is to say is that the family support is crucial. I'm married now. I've been married now for 30 years, and I think, Dan, you've been married for a while too. And I will say that my spouse, my wife Susie, is my biggest support, and sees me and knows me better than anybody, and it can also tell when something isn't going on well. She calls me out. She'll ask me, "How are you doing? Are you okay?" And and she'll kind of look me over, and I need that, because sometimes when I don't even see it myself, but she can see it. And I think and not everybody has that too. I don't think not everybody has a spouse or a partner or a loved one or significant other that they're with. But for me and anybody who does, that's very helpful as well.
I think too, Matt, real quick, just jumping on what Karl said, is that I had to learn to be a better communicator with my wife and my friends and family. So I think it's common, at least it was for me, where my wife felt that, gee, maybe he's unhappy in our marriage. Maybe he's unhappy with me. And, I was not very communicative. I went into my shell and I had to learn to say to her, honey, I had a bad day today. My depression really got the best of me. And then to tell her maybe what I needed, what do you need? I just really need to sit here on my recliner and decompress and watch a show. Or she might say, what can I do for you today? Can you bake me a cherry pie? I love fruit pies. So, it's about learning. Lots of people want to help, but, sometimes we have to help them to understand how they can help us. There'll be times we don't know how they can help us, but I think things can get a lot better when we communicate what we need.
No doubt. That's a two-way street, and that's ongoing, and that's every day, and it has to be intentional, especially for those of us who maybe aren't able to do that as easily as others. So that's very, very good advice, no doubt. Another question has come through on the chat, and this is really, it's aimed at Karl, but Dan, I'm sure you might have something to say about this. Because of your profession, no, actually, I'm going to go this one ahead of that. Did your mental health change your professional course? Especially, Karl, you having experienced the symptoms early on, did this dictate kind of how your professional career went?
I would say absolutely. So, I had like I mentioned before, I had gotten clean, and it turned out it was 1988. I was working at a recording studio actually at the time. My undergrad degree was in broadcasting of all things. I thought I was going to work in radio. I wanted to, or something like that. And I was working at a local recording studio, but like I said, I got clean. And at that point, I went through this existential crisis of like, okay, this isn't for me. I don't know what it is. So I quit that job, and I worked a bunch of temp jobs for a while. And I realized, I really enjoy this atmosphere of recovery and meetings, and I really, kind of like this recovery thing. Why don't I just become a counselor? So I end up enrolling at ECC. And at the time, they had two different tracks, an alcoholism track and a substance use track. And I went for the alcoholism track, and I went through all the education. I got my credential for alcoholism counseling, which then got grandfathered into a CASAC, which is credentialed addiction substance use counseling. But anyway, that's when I entered the field in 1992. And that really charted my course for 6 years, but I had another episode in 1995. I ended up going into higher education for 12 years because I thought, well, this thing is, I'm done with this. I can't do this anymore. But right around 2008, I got this kind of push, or even a calling to get back into behavioral health. And I started doing some things on my own. I started reaching out to people like Maura Kelly, who is a local, advocate, who works at Westbrook Independent Living, Mental Health Peer Connection, the Westbrook Children's Psychiatric Center, NAMI. So I just connect with these local people to the point where I did some work at Horizon on a per diem basis, and then end up going back there full time. And then that kind of led one thing to another, and kind of took the course of my career fully in behavioral health, where it's been ever since.
That's really interesting. And I know we wanted to make sure we talked about some of those things. And there are opportunities in the field all the time. And we talked a bit earlier about the need for people to be in the field and to make it a career, and to stick it out and be with people who can absolutely help. And of course, once you start talking openly about this issue, you are making it safer for others to talk about this issue. Do either of you find that people are approaching you on the regular to talk about this issue because you've been so public? Dan, has that happened to you?
Yeah, I think my experience is maybe a little unique in this respect, is that mental health, well, all mental health problems and addiction problems are big in the law. For example, a study of 13,000 lawyers found that 28% in the past year had a problem with depression. That's like 4 times the general population. So I think that I've had a unique experience in the sense that I've been so public about my experiences with depression, and launched 15 years ago a website called Lawyers with Depression, where I still blog about living and working with depression. So I think to that extent, because I was such an odd, I could say that odd bird, or, to be so public about it so many years ago, I find that many lawyers, I remember so clearly 10 years ago, having a case, and my opponent and I went to lunch, and he says, me too, Dan, and I knew instantly what he was talking about, his own depression. So I feel like Karl, and that it's like a privilege to help people like that, and to be in our community. And my little, 2 cents contribution, I think with anybody, try and help anybody with depression or stigma, but we have 4,000 lawyers in Erie County. So it's nice to think, for me at least, it gives a lot of meaning to my own predicament, that, gee, what I've been through can be, helpful to someone.
Yeah, and it's not uncommon that people will approach me, and or we have a conversation, and then I open up about my own challenges and what I deal with, and then they will say, "Oh, wow," and then they'll talk about it, and so I find that being open also addresses stigma, and when I'm open with someone, that allows them to be open. And then we can share our experience, even though it may not be the identical experience. It still opens up the door for the conversation, and that's what we're here for, right? Join the conversation. And I've learned over time that I'm pretty much open book about these things, and at the end of the day, it's helped me, if anything, in a lot of ways. But I find that people are receptive if you do open up. Because we're all affected, whether it be ourselves or someone that we know in our families or our friends, we're all affected. And I think having this conversation in a broader sense is a way for people to be more willing to talk about their own stories.
Okay, go ahead, Dan.
Just one quick thing. You asked earlier about things I've done that have been helpful, and I talked about medication, therapy, and a support group. The other thing that is important for me, I don't talk about it a lot, but is my own spiritual life. When I talked after the film at UB, I said, there's many aspects to recovery, but for me personally, just my personal individual story, God was like the glue that kept me together somehow, and that kept me going forward. The tragedy of my brother's life was, that he didn't have the kind of opportunities I've been privileged to have. And I think that he did feel so much stigma and shame, and he was never able to, I guess, in some way come to terms with it, and not only seek help, whatever your spiritual path is, it could be, you could be Jewish or Muslim or some other path, doesn't matter. I think the point for me was I really had to draw on something bigger than me, not only a support group, but something much bigger than me. I think, to be honest, the film got made. There were so many things that happened out of the blue that could possibly, in my view, that would not have happened but for that. After we made the film, Crisis Services got involved, and that they contacted the Patrick Lee Foundation, which is this foundation started by this very wealthy philanthropist. And they stepped in and gave a grant to hire a marketing team and graphics design team. They paid for receptions at both venues. What are the chances of that? That's kind of how I feel about it. So,
well, that's definitely an important piece of work. And if you're willing, I know this Anti-Stigma Coalition would like to do some more around that film with you in the future. So everybody, please do stay tuned for that. How are we doing though, guys? I mean, in terms of the issue of stigma and trying to get it to a better place, how have you seen things going over the last 10, 20 years? Are we making progress? Are things better?
I would say yes and no. um, Mental health is a lot more openly talked about. I think COVID was a huge reason for that. I think when, well, we're still in COVID now. I don't think it's ever going to end. But when the height of the pandemic and the lockdown, I think people's mental health really came to the forefront because all of a sudden people realized, wait a minute, I don't have my supports. I don't have the things I can usually do for my self-care, whatever that might be, or and I'm feeling it. And then we also saw it in our youth, our children, especially in our youth and our children. So, and then add on to that, we saw examples of celebrities, you know, Michael Phelps, Simone Biles, come out and talk about their own challenges. So now it's more open, but there's still stigma. There are many people in certain arenas, and I won't go there, but who still use terminology and will paint people with mental illness as being violent or whatever. And research shows that that isn't the case. If anything, it's the opposite. People with mental illness are more likely to be victims than perpetrators, but not according to some people who would like to say that otherwise. And so we have to combat that with facts. And that's why the coalition, the work we've done over the years is so important, because we present the facts. We've done surveys. We've done perception surveys about what people think, and we can get the information out there through the research that we've done to show what it really is that we're dealing with. But and even in communities, like there's still a lot of stigma in the Black community, the Latino community, with mental illness and mental health. So we've come a long way, but there's a lot of work to be done.
Yeah, I was just gonna, Carl stole my words in response, yes and no. I mean, one of the stats I put on the Buffalo Depression Project website is that 220,000 adults in Erie County will develop depression at some point in their lives. That is a lot of people. And I think to the degree we have things like this, actually the great work the coalition is doing and Facebook Live events like this, providing opportunities for not only individuals. I think where the evolution is going is in the workplace. My job really 100% is about educating and inspiring people in the New York State court system workplace. We have 16,000 employees throughout New York State. So all my, when I do my presentations or educational presentations, they're done during the workday. And I say to leaders, my God, this is such an enormous topic that touches so many people. And I said, if you really want to build morale, just think of this. Have something at the workplace on this topic where everybody comes together. And I think it sends a very clear message that normalizes it and that says to people that work at a place, gee, my place cares about this topic. So I think that the what we're seeing at all levels of society is a recognition about the how important it is. I think where we still have a long way to go is with businesses, corporations, not doing these kind of programs as a one-off or two-off per year. It's not just saying, okay, check that, I've done that for the year. It has to be really integrated from the top down by leaders and take a really fresh, open look at is, okay, how can we support our employees throughout the year or as part of our mission as a company or a corporation? So I think that's coming, but it's all going to take time.
No doubt, it certainly has. As far as we've only got a couple of minutes left, and I would just like to ask each of you. I mean, obviously, you've come to where you are now. You've been on a journey, and again, thank you on behalf of all of us for sharing that journey. What do you think attributed mostly to get you here in terms of a successful for lack of a better word, situation with your lives? What were the things that really you could pass on to others as key advice who might be going down a similar path?
Well, I would say for me, yeah, it's not just one thing. There's no, you know, silver bullet. I hate to use that term, but there's no one single solution or single thing. It's been a combination of things. So first of all, it is the support I receive from family and friends, especially my family, who are understanding and willing to kind of help me when I need it. My wife has a really interesting quote, though. She says, "I'm not going to ride the roller coaster with you." She tells me that all the time, and it's true because she doesn't like go through my swings, right? If I go through things, she's really pretty grounded. I have a great psychiatrist. I have a great therapist who are part of my treatment team. I have a faith community, like Dan mentioned. I have a faith community that's very supportive. I have a 12-step program that I've been a part of now for 37 years that is integral in my recovery, and I have friends there. So I have a lot of tools. I have access to healthcare. I'm very fortunate to have a good healthcare plan, insurance that I use. And so I have all these great tools to be healthy. I have access to a gym for exercise. So as I've said to myself and others, I have every tool necessary to be healthy. And so I try to use these tools regularly to be as healthy as I can be. I mean, I'm not perfect. I don't, I'm not, there's always areas to work on, but I've been very fortunate in that respect.
I think for me,
big proponent of routine, Karl, with what you
yeah,
just
that's
said.
sleep. Oh yeah, sleep. Can't forget about sleep. Sleep's huge.
I think for me, and this is, I guess we're trying to cover as many bases as possible, but it's an aspect of spirituality, but it isn't exactly the same thing. It's service, and I've known Karl a long time, and I want to thank him for his service. It's such an important part of helping other people in one's life, and certainly it's had an impact on my mental health. Maybe 10 years ago, I felt like I was poor in spirit, and a friend somehow connected me to St. Luke's Mission, which is on the east side of Buffalo, which is, for those of you don't know, it's the poorest part of our community. And I went looking for something, I didn't know what, and they matched me with a child who was 10, a young boy of color who his father died when he was a baby, and I don't have a son, so we became like father and son, and we still are. Yeah, we are father and son. And the funny thing about it is, it's not like a cure per se for depression, but I have to tell you that meaning and purpose in life are very important, because I think the illness of depression can rob you of that, or give you the illusion that your life is meaningless or purposeless. There's so many times when I was going through depression, which I still do, where I say, what's the point? Everything feels black or meaningless or gray. But, when I see George is his name, and we see each other twice a week, is that I also know he's depending on me, and people will really get it wrong when they'll say, oh, it's so nice what you do for George. But I always correct them and say, it's so great what he does for me. It's a true friendship, a unique friendship. It's a mystery how it all came about, but I do think that however people can find a way to be of service in some regard, and it doesn't have to be, through a religious thing, but some way other than your job, I guess that's the point I'm trying to make, where you're nourished in that relationship, and you're nourishing.
Really great advice, Dan, and thank you for sharing that. Thank you both for, again, continue to be so forthcoming, and again, through talking is how we're going to continue to chip away at this very, very important issue. We're about out of time, but basically, I'd like to make sure I say special thank you to Dan Lukasik and Karl Shallowhorn. Thank you so much for being our guest today. And I'd also like to thank everyone behind the scenes, Mike Telesco from Telesco Creative Group for his vision and technical support, and Karen Karaszewski from KKR Buffalo for her support as well. As a reminder to our audience, we need you to take the pledge to end stigma by going to our website, letstalkstigma.org. If your organization would like to join us in our cause, there's information on the website as well. Just click on the members tab to find out how. Together, we can reduce stigma and create an environment of support where help seeking and help giving are the norm. We hope you'll join us for our next Facebook Live, which will be coming your way on February 19th. We'll be taking a look at the issue of stigma as it relates to eating disorders. And if you joined us late or want to tell anyone about this website, all of our Facebook Live programs are available at our website, letstalkstigma.live. So, letstalkstigma.org. So on behalf of the Anti-Stigma Coalition, until next time, I'm Matt Smith. Stand up to stigma and good luck on your wellness journey.